But first, let's get to the big story, the transformation of our economy under President Trump. Of course, you wouldn't know it from the rest of the media, who've been obsessing all day about a leaked legal memo about the Russia investigation. But jobs, economic growth, incomes, these are the things that affect you and your family, and it's what the populist revolution is all about. So here's another couple of numbers that I haven't seen covered anywhere else. 5.4%. That's close to the lowest unemployment rate on record for workers without a high school diploma. Or how about this? 10% is the rise in weekly earnings in the first quarter of this year for Americans without a high school diploma. 0.5% is the rise in earnings for college graduates. That is clear evidence that the Trump economy is helping exactly the people the president promised to help, those left behind by decades of elitist policies. Joining me now to discuss all this, host of Kennedy on the Fox Business Network, Kennedy is here, and we're so pleased.
So nice to see you in beautiful Los Angeles.
So a lot of people in the 2016 campaign said, despite some of the things that President Trump says or does they may not be comfortable with, they were going to back him precisely because of this big issue of the economy. At least he'll get the economy moving.
Yes.
It really feels like that's what's happening.
And, you know, there's always a disconnect between the way Washington sees the economy and the way families see the economy. And it's interesting because populism doesn't necessarily have to mean statism or groupthink. And it's really been about individuals and families who have looked at the landscape and two parties that seem to be molding into one. And they've asked themselves for years, what's in it for me? You know, if you talk about a windfall on Wall Street, and for some people, that's great. You know, for investors who have millions and billions of dollars, that's fantastic. I don't begrudge them their wealth. And for people who have pensions or 401ks, and that sort of solidifies their retirement, that's really great. But for, you know, just under half of the rest of Americans who don't have any money in the stock market, you know, those metrics don't necessarily apply to them. So what they want is someone who thinks in an unorthodox way that is actually going to shake things up and more importantly, hold people accountable who have been abusing their power and forgetting about them. And it's interesting because when you hear Hillary Clinton and President Obama and Ben Rhodes talk about the failure of the 2016 election, it was their failure to, you know, in very basic terms, look at the problems that these people had and address them practically.
Well, this is the thing. So Ben Rhodes, you mentioned, I mean, he was out, he's got this book coming out or come out, I don't know where it is, but he had this quote in it, which I thought really spoke to this cluelessness in the elite, where he's talking about exactly what you were just saying, why they lost, and Obama musing on whether the reason that he was rejected and Trump came in, who's so different from him, was all to do with race, whether the fact is that I was 10 or 20 years too early, Obama said. They think it's all about race, but actually it's this fact that the elitist policies that they followed, and let's be fair, the previous administration, George W. Bush as well, just left so many people behind. It's nothing to do with race, it's to do with the fact that the economy wasn't working for working people.
And if you look at those similarities, you know, you have two big spending presidents who really felt that they could just apply their worldview and make people's lives better, whether it's starting wars in the Middle East or having, you know, massive domestic spending programs that actually made people's lives worse. It made it harder to start a business, and for a lot of people, that meant dropping out of the workforce entirely. So for a lot of the Obama campaign, you know, you had employment numbers that were going up, unemployment was going down a little bit, but it wasn't as rosy of a picture because you had a massive part of the labor force that simply wasn't participating at all. I mean, they had completely given up.
And that's what's changing now. And actually, the people, they go on about the 1% and the tax cut that benefited the rich, but actually, the people who are really benefiting right now, as some of those numbers showed, were the people at the bottom coming into the labor market for the first time, and their wages going up. I just want to ask you, though, in terms of looking ahead, what do you think the impact will be of this trade strategy that the president's pursuing?
It depends what his long-term goal is. In the short term, it gets people on both sides really riled up. And for the free market economists, I understand while they're nervous because they know economic protectionism doesn't work long term. But if the president is using it as a short-term strategy, if this is a negotiation tool to recraft NAFTA in a way that he sees as more amenable to the United States and to have more favorable trade with the EU and Canada and Mexico, and it is something short-term, and it does work out, and it does eventually lead to more U.S. economic growth, then that's ultimately good. If it's a long-term strategy and we're really going to shut down our trade borders, that's going to be problematic for just the people you were talking about, because it means that there are a lot of goods that could be much more expensive if there is, in fact, a protracted trade war. Things like steel and aluminum go into making a bunch of other things. And if those things are more expensive because of mutual tariffs, that's going to be a big issue and cut into people's spending power with inflation also on the rise.
I really agree with that analysis. I think that, but we should believe what he says. He says, I'm for free trade, but also fair trade. I think it's the beginning of a negotiation. I just want to switch to one more topic, because this is something that really kind of got me riled up this week. It was John Brennan, who's out with this extremely aggressive attack on President Trump. Let's look what he said earlier. I think it was on Thursday or Friday, about the president.
Mr. Trump is going to promote his narrative. He certainly is going to continue to try to discredit the FBI and the CIA and others. But I think, make no mistake about it, the American justice system, I think, is going to prevail in this endeavor to get to the bottom of who might have been collaborating and working with foreign actors to try to undermine the integrity of the election.
I mean, collaborating and working with foreign actors to undermine the election. I mean, hang on a second. It was you, John Brennan. He was the one that got involved with the dossier, using a British spy from another country with the Russians. I mean, I can't believe the arrogance of these people.
Yeah, and then, the FBI kind of employing Christopher Steele for a certain amount of time. And we also, it's funny because I think John Brennan, like James Comey, they think they're saviors of these gilded institutions, but the opacity there makes it very difficult for us to hold them accountable. And what he's doing, this defensive posturing that you've seen from him and James Comey, all it looks like they're doing is trying to shield themselves from any accountability. That's one of the first things that we talked about tonight. And, the lack of accountability and the lack of transparency, it should be very troubling, not just for people who are defenders of the president, but for people who value civil liberties in this country. And I think his attacks are very small-minded. I think they're incredibly short-sighted, and they do very little to improve the perceptions of the intelligence community. And if that's what he's trying to do, he needs to come up with a better strategy. I don't think that's what he's trying to do. I think he hates the president. I think he's opposed to him politically, and he's doing whatever he can, hiding behind his invisible shield, to harm the president in any way possible.
I totally agree. And it's symbolic of this ruling elite that just can't believe that President Trump won, that Brexit happened. Now in Italy, we're seeing it all over the place. We'll get to that later. Kennedy, thank you so much.
So nice to see you, Steve.
Lovely to see you.
Thank you.